October 15, 2024. When billionaire CEO Marcus Thornfield spotted the Maid's daughter serving champagne at his company's exclusive charity gala, he decided to make an example of her in front of 300 elite guests, mocking her worn shoes and low-class presence. What he didn't know was that Elena Martinez had evidence that could destroy everything he'd built, and the cameras were already rolling. Would she stay silent to protect her mother's job, or expose the truth that would bring a billion-dollar empire crashing down? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The grand celestial ballroom glittered like a jewel box under the cascade of crystal chandeliers. Elena Martinez smoothed down her crisp white serving uniform, her fingers trembling slightly as she balanced the silver tray of champagne flutes. At 23, she'd served at dozens of high society events, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she was walking into the lion's den. "Keep your head down, mija," her mother Rosa had whispered that morning while pressing Elena's uniform. "Mr. Thornfield doesn't like to be reminded that the help has faces." Rosa Martinez had cleaned Marcus Thornfield's penthouse for 15 years, scrubbing marble floors and dusting priceless art while remaining invisible. It was a survival skill she'd mastered, one she'd tried desperately to teach her daughter. But Elena had never been good at making herself small. The gala was Thornfield Industries' annual charity event, a spectacle where Manhattan's elite gathered to write tax-deductible checks while congratulating themselves on their generosity. This year's cause was education for underprivileged youth, a irony not lost on Elena, who'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through community college while her mother scrubbed toilets for millionaires. Elena weaved through clusters of designer gowns and $1,000 tuxedos, offering champagne with a practiced smile. She'd almost made it to the kitchen when she heard it, that voice that had echoed through her childhood, filtering down from the penthouse to the service quarters where she'd waited for her mother to finish work. "Is this really the best staff you could arrange, Patricia?" Marcus Thornfield's voice cut through the ambient music like a blade. "I specifically requested premium service for tonight." Elena's stomach dropped. She knew she should keep walking, disappear into the safety of the kitchen, but her feet had frozen to the marble floor. Marcus Thornfield stood 15 feet away, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, his custom Tom Ford tuxedo fitting like a second skin. At 52, he'd built Thornfield Industries from a small tech startup into a multinational corporation worth $4.3 billion. Forbes had just named him one of America's most influential CEOs. Patricia Chen, the event coordinator, wrung her hands nervously. "Mr. Thornfield, I assure you all our servers are highly trained." "Highly trained." Marcus's laugh was sharp and cold. His pale blue eyes swept the room and landed directly on Elena. "Then perhaps you can explain why one of them looks like she got dressed in a thrift store basement." The conversations around them began to fade. Heads turned. Elena felt 300 pairs of eyes shifting in her direction, taking in her slightly too large uniform, the scuffed black flats she'd polished that morning until her arms ached. They were the same shoes she'd worn for 2 years, the best she could afford on a server's wages. "Sir, I don't think," Patricia began, but Marcus raised a hand to silence her. He began walking toward Elena, each step measured and deliberate. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, sensing entertainment. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "It was a mistake." "You?" Marcus said, stopping 3 feet away. Up close, Elena could smell his cologne, something expensive and sharp like cedar and dominance. "What's your name?" "Elena Martinez, sir." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Martinez." He drew out the syllables, tasting them. "Any relation to Rosa Martinez?" Elena's blood turned to ice. "She's my mother." A smile played at the corners of Marcus's mouth, but it held no warmth. Of course she is." "I should have recognized the resemblance. Same cheap shoes, same inability to understand your place." He turned to address the crowd, raising his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when charity becomes confused. We write checks for scholarships, and people start to believe they belong in rooms like this. Scattered, uncomfortable laughter rippled through the audience. Some guests looked away, embarrassed but unwilling to intervene. Others leaned in, their eyes bright with the cruelty of the insulated wealthy. Elena's hands tightened on her tray. She could feel the weight of the thumb drive in her uniform pocket, the one she'd found 3 weeks ago while cleaning out old files in her mother's supply closet. The one containing email chains, financial records, and recorded phone calls that proved Marcus Thornfield had been systematically defrauding his investors and embezzling from his own charity foundation. Money that was supposed to build schools had instead been funneled into offshore accounts and personal real estate purchases. She'd debated for weeks about what to do with the information. Her mother would lose her job. They could face retaliation, legal threats, worse. But standing here now, watching Marcus Thornfield mock her poverty for sport, something crystallized inside her. "My shoes may be cheap, Mr. Thornfield," Elena said quietly, "but at least I paid for them with honest work." The ballroom went silent. Marcus's smile vanished, replaced by something darker. "Excuse me?" "I said—" Elena spoke louder now, her voice carrying across the marble and gilt. "At least my money comes from honest work." "Can you say the same?" Patricia gasped. Several guests murmured in shock. No one spoke to Marcus Thornfield this way, especially not a server, especially not the daughter of his maid. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow still carried. "You have no idea who you're talking to, little girl. I could have you and your mother out on the street by morning. I could make sure neither of you ever works in this city again. Is that how you handle everyone who questions you?" Elena's heart was racing, but momentum carried her forward. Threats? Intimidation? Abuse of power? Security! Marcus snapped his fingers. "Remove this woman from my event. And someone call my head of household. Tell Rosa Martinez her services are no longer required." 2 security guards in dark suits began moving toward Elena. The crowd watched with bated breath, some with pity, most with the detached fascination of people watching a car crash from a safe distance. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out the thumb drive. She held it up so the light caught its metallic surface, so every camera in the room, and there were dozens, recording the gala for promotional purposes, could see it clearly. "Before I go," she said, her voice ringing clear and strong, "I think everyone here should know what their donations have really been funding." Marcus froze. The color drained from his face so quickly that for a moment Elena thought he might collapse. His eyes locked onto the thumb drive with the recognition of a man seeing his worst nightmare materialized. "What is that?" someone in the crowd asked. Elena looked directly into the nearest camera, the red recording light blinking steadily. "This," she said, "is the truth about Marcus Thornfield. And I think it's time everyone saw it." The security guards stopped, uncertain. Patricia stood with her mouth open. Marcus Thornfield, billionaire CEO, one of the most powerful men in America, looked at a 23-year-old server in scuffed shoes and finally understood what it meant to be afraid. The silence that followed Eleanor's declaration felt like glass about to shatter. Marcus Thornfield's face had gone from pale to flushed, a dangerous red creeping up his neck. His jaw worked soundlessly for 3 full seconds before he managed to speak. "That's private property," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You stole from me." "Actually," Elena replied, surprised by her own calm, "I found it in a recycling bin. Funny thing about throwing away evidence. Once it's in the trash, it's fair game." A woman in a midnight blue Valentino gown stepped forward from the crowd. Elena recognized her immediately. Diane Westbrook, investigative journalist for the Manhattan Chronicle. She'd won a Pulitzer 2 years ago for exposing corruption in city government. Her presence at the gala suddenly made sense. She'd been circling Thornfield Industries for months. Elena had read, but could never find concrete proof. "Ms. Martinez," Diane said, her phone already out and recording, "are you claiming that drive contains evidence of criminal activity?" Marcus moved fast, inserting himself between Elena and the journalist. This is a charity event, not a three-ring circus. Whatever delusional conspiracy theories this young woman has concocted, then you won't mind if we take a look, interrupted a male voice from the left. Jonathan Pierce emerged from the crowd, and Elena's breath caught. Pierce was a federal prosecutor known for taking down white-collar criminals. He'd put away 2 hedge fund managers and a pharmaceutical CEO just last year. What was he doing at a Thornfield Industries gala? Marcus's eyes darted between Pierce, Diane, and Elena, calculating. "Jonathan, surely you don't believe—" "I believe in evidence," Pierce said simply. "And if Ms. Martinez is making accusations in front of 300 witnesses and multiple cameras, she either has something substantial or she's committing career suicide. My money's on the former." Patricia Chen, who'd been standing frozen like a statue, finally found her voice. "Perhaps we should move this to a private room." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No. The word came from Elena, sharp and final. That's what he wants. Privacy. Darkness. That's where men like Marcus Thornfield thrive. She looked around at the assembled crowd. CEOs, socialites, politicians, philanthropists. Everyone here came tonight because they believe in transparency, in accountability, in using wealth to make the world better. Right, nervous nods, uncomfortable shifting. A few people at the back began edging toward the exits. "So let's be transparent," Elena continued. She turned to the nearest camera operator, a young man with wide eyes holding an expensive video rig. "Can you connect that camera to the ballroom screens?" The operator looked at Patricia, who looked at Marcus. The billionaire's face had become a mask, smooth, unreadable, dangerous. "Do it," Diane Westbrook said, stepping beside Elena in a gesture of solidarity that sent a clear message. "The public has a right to know where their charitable donations are going." The operator hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. "Yeah, I can route it through the AV system. Give me 2 minutes." Those 2 minutes stretched like taffy. Marcus stood rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Elena could see his mind working, running through options, calculating angles of attack. She'd seen her mother make the same calculations 1,000 times. How to survive when all the power was stacked against you. "Elena." The whisper came from behind her. She turned to find her mother standing there, still in her maid's uniform, her face stricken with terror. "Mia, what are you doing?" "Please, we can't. He'll destroy us." "He's already destroying people, Mama," Elena said softly. "We just found out how many." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "I've worked for him for 15 years. I've kept my head down, stayed invisible, given you everything I could." "I know." Elena took her mother's weathered hand. "And I'm so grateful. But staying invisible didn't protect us, did it? He still humiliated me in front of everyone. He still threatened to fire you for my insolence. Men like him, they take and take until someone finally says no." "I'm ready," called the camera operator. The 6 massive screens positioned around the ballroom flickered to life, currently showing the Thornfield Industries logo, a silver T wrapped in laurel leaves. Marcus made one final play. He turned to face the crowd, his posture shifting, shoulders back. Chin up, the practiced stance of a man used to commanding rooms. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as whiskey now, "I apologize for this unfortunate disruption. This young woman is clearly troubled. Her mother has been in my employ for many years, and I've watched Elena struggle with, let's call them, stability issues. Out of respect for Rosa's loyal service, I've overlooked certain behavioral concerns, but I have a bachelor's degree in accounting from Manhattan Community College," Elena cut in. "I graduated summa cum laude. I've never been arrested, never been hospitalized, never been fired from a job. But please, Mr. Thornfield, continue explaining my stability issues to people who've never met me." Several guests actually laughed, nervous but genuine. The tide was shifting. Elena could feel it. "The drive, please," Jonathan Pierce said, extending his hand. "Unless someone has a compelling legal reason to prevent its contents from being viewed." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Elena had never seen him at a loss for words. It was oddly humanizing, seeing the great Marcus Thornfield floundering like a caught fish. Elena walked toward the camera operator, thumb drive held out. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up with her. This was it, the point of no return. Once she plugged in that drive, her life would never be the same. Her mother's life would never be the same. She thought about all the nights Rosa had come home with aching knees and chemical burns on her hands. Thought about the college fund her mother had scraped together dollar by dollar while Marcus Thornfield bought his third vacation home. Thought about the scholarship recipients whose money had been stolen, the investors who'd been lied to, the employees who'd been cheated. For the record, Elena said, loud enough for every microphone to catch, I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this because someone has to. She plugged in the drive. The screens flickered. A moment of black. Then text appeared, an email header dated 3 years ago. From Marcus Thornfield to Richard Vance. CFO RE, Foundation Reallocation Richard. Move another $2 million from the scholarship fund to the Cayman account. Make it look like administrative costs. No one actually audits these charity operations. They're too busy patting themselves on the back for being philanthropic. The ballroom erupted. Chaos rippled through the grand celestial ballroom like a shockwave. Guests surged forward, craning their necks to read the email displayed across 6 massive screens. Others pulled out phones, snapping photos, typing furiously. The carefully orchestrated elegance of the evening dissolved into pandemonium. That's fabricated. Marcus's voice boomed over the noise. Someone doctored those emails. Corporate espionage, clearly meant to. The screen changed. Another email appeared, this one with an attachment icon. The camera operator clicked it open. A spreadsheet materialized, columns of numbers in neat rows. The header read, Thornfield Foundation Financial Records, confidential. Diane Westbrook pushed her way to the front, her journalist's instincts razor sharp. She studied the spreadsheet, her eyes widening. These are wire transfers. Millions of dollars moving from the Foundation's scholarship fund to... She scrolled down. The shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and the British Virgin Islands. I want my lawyer, Marcus said, his voice strained. Right now. Oh, you'll need several, Jonathan Pierce replied, pulling out his own phone. Miss Martinez, do I have your permission to photograph this evidence? Elena nodded, still clutching her mother's hand. Rosa was trembling, tears streaming down her face, but she hadn't let go. The documents kept coming, each one more damning than the last. Bank statements showing Marcus's personal accounts swelling with funds that matched the amounts missing from the foundation. Text messages between Marcus and his CFO, Richard Vance, discussing how to backdate invoices and create fake vendors. A recorded phone call, the thumb drive contained audio files too, where Marcus laughed about donors, being too stupid and self-satisfied to ask questions. Jesus Christ, muttered someone in the crowd. He stole from cancer patients. The pediatric wing donation was supposed to be $8 million, another voice finished. The hospital only received 3. A woman in a glittering emerald gown stepped forward, her face ashen. Elena recognized her from photos. Senator Margaret Holbrook, chair of the Senate Finance Committee. I personally donated $500,000 to the Thornfield Foundation last year. Are you telling me that money never reached its intended recipients? Not all of it, ma'am, Eleanor said quietly. According to the documents, approximately 63% of all donations made to the foundation over the past 5 years were diverted. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. 63%. Millions upon millions of dollars that were meant to build schools, fund scholarships, support medical research vanished into Marcus Thornfield's private coffers. You can't prove any of this, Marcus snarled. But his voice had lost its commanding edge. He sounded desperate now, cornered. These files could have been altered, manipulated. They have metadata, Elena interrupted. She'd spent weeks studying these files, learning everything she could about digital forensics from free online courses. Creation dates, edit histories, IP addresses. Everything traces back to Thornfield Industries servers and your personal devices. I also made copies, sent to 3 different law firms, 2 journalists, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. As of about 20 minutes ago, actually. Marcus's face went slack. When? Right before I walked out onto this floor, Elena said. I scheduled the emails to send at 8:30. I figured if something happened to me, if you had me arrested or silenced somehow, the truth would still come out. It was a bluff, partially. She'd sent the files to one lawyer and Diane Westbrook's office, but not the FBI. Not yet. But Marcus didn't know that, and watching his carefully constructed empire crumble in real time was almost worth the risk. A new file opened on screen, a PDF of an internal memo. Marcus's own handwriting was visible in the margins. Fire anyone who asks questions. Keep the board in the dark. They're decorative anyway. I'm on your board, Marcus, growled a silver-haired man in a Brioni tuxedo. Preston Carmichael, founder of Carmichael Capital and one of the most respected venture capitalists in America. You told us the foundation was running a lean operation, that every dollar was accounted for. I vouched for you to a dozen major donors. Preston, you have to understand the business climate, the pressure to perform. Marcus was sweating now, his perfect hair beginning to wilt. Don't. Preston's voice was ice. Don't you dare try to justify this. You didn't steal because you were under pressure. You stole because you thought you were untouchable. More files cycled across the screens. Property deeds for a villa in Tuscany, purchased with foundation funds. A 70-foot yacht registered under a shell company. Credit card statements for personal expenses, designer clothes, jewelry, a weekend in Monaco, all charged to charitable accounts. The crowd had split into factions. Some guests were filming everything on their phones, documenting the downfall. Others huddled in groups, whispering urgently about their own donations, their reputations, their potential legal exposure. A few had simply left, unwilling to be associated with the scandal already metastasizing around them. Security stood frozen, uncertain who to take orders from. Patricia Chen had disappeared entirely. Mr. Thornfield, Jonathan Pierce said, pocketing his phone. I've just been in contact with my office. Given the evidence being presented here tonight and the seriousness of the allegations, I'm formally recommending that the U.S. Attorney's Office open an immediate investigation into your financial activities. You can't do this, Marcus said, but the fight had drained from his voice. You're at my event, eating my food, eating food paid for with stolen money, Pierce corrected. That's the problem, Marcus. None of this was ever really yours. Diane Westbrook was typing frantically on her phone, her photographer colleague snapping shots of the screens. Ms. Martinez, I'd like to interview you after this. Exclusively, if possible. Your story needs to be told. Eleanor felt dizzy suddenly, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a freight train. Her mother's arms came around her, steadying her. You're so brave, Mija, Rosa whispered. So brave. But what happens now? That was the question, wasn't it? Elena had exposed the truth, but the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Marcus Thornfield was ruined. That much was clear from the way he'd begun to shrink into himself, his powerful frame seeming to collapse inward. But powerful men rarely fell alone. Ms. Martinez, called a voice from the crowd. A young woman in a simple black dress approached, her eyes red-rimmed. I'm Sarah Chen. I was supposed to receive a Thornfield Foundation scholarship 3 years ago. Full ride to Columbia. 2 weeks before classes started, they rescinded it. Said there was a funding error. I had to take out massive loans instead. Another person stepped forward. My son's school was promised new computers. They never came. Then another. The clinic in my neighborhood was supposed to get equipment donations. One by one, the victims of Marcus Thornfield's greed began to speak. The ballroom transformed from a showcase of wealth into a confessional. People sharing stories of promises broken, opportunities stolen, lives derailed by one man's insatiable appetite for more. Marcus stood at the center of it all, a king dethroned, watching his legacy burn to ash. Elena looked at the screens, still cycling through evidence of fraud and betrayal. She thought about that morning, ironing her uniform, preparing to be invisible. She wasn't invisible anymore. None of them were. What happens now, Elena said, answering her mother's question at last, is that we make sure this never happens again. The police arrived at 9:47 p.m., their flashing lights visible through the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena watched two uniformed officers enter, followed by a plainclothes detective with tired eyes and a rumpled suit. Jonathan Pierce met them at the entrance, speaking in low, urgent tones. Marcus Thornfield hadn't moved in 10 minutes. He stood near the bar, his expensive tuxedo suddenly looking like a costume, his face the color of old newspaper. His phone had been ringing constantly. Board members, lawyers, probably his wife at their estate in Greenwich. He'd stopped answering after the 5th call. "Mr. Thornfield," the detective said, approaching with measured steps. "Detective Luis Reyes, according to the badge he flashed. I'm going to need you to come with us. We have some questions about financial irregularities at your foundation. Am I under arrest?" Marcus's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Not yet," Reyes replied. "But I strongly suggest you cooperate. Things will go easier if you do." For a moment, Elena thought Marcus might run. His eyes darted toward the side exits, his body tensing like a cornered animal. But Preston Carmichael stepped into his path, arms crossed, blocking the route. The message was clear. There was nowhere left to hide. "I'll need to collect my things," Marcus said finally. "Your assistant can bring them to the station," Reyes said. "Let's go." As the detective led Marcus toward the exit, the fallen CEO's eyes found Elena across the crowded ballroom. The look he gave her was pure venom, a promise of retribution that made her blood run cold. But beneath the hatred, she saw something else, fear. Real primal fear of a man who'd built his entire identity on power and control, now watching it all slip away. "Ms. Martinez?" A woman in a navy pantsuit approached, holding out a business card. "I'm Catherine Wu, attorney with the Southern District. We'll need your full cooperation in the coming investigation." "Everything you know, every document you have." Eleanor took the card with numb fingers. "Of course. Whatever you need." "You did the right thing," Catherine said quietly. "But I won't lie to you. It's going to get harder before it gets easier. Thornfield has powerful friends, expensive lawyers. They'll come after your credibility, your background, everything. Let them," Elena said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "I'm not the one who stole millions from charity." Rosa clutched her daughter's arm as Catherine walked away. "Mija, we need to leave. We need to go somewhere safe." "Your mother's right," Diane Westbrook interjected, lowering her phone. "This story is already trending on social media. My editor is calling it the biggest financial scandal since Madoff. You're going to be famous by morning, which means you're also going to be a target." Elena hadn't considered that. She'd been so focused on exposing Marcus, on doing the right thing, that she hadn't thought about what came after. Fame, scrutiny, danger. "I have a friend who runs a secure hotel in Brooklyn," Diane continued. "Former Secret Service. He owes me a favor. I can have you both there within the hour, off the radar, until this initial frenzy dies down." "We can't afford," Rosa began. "No charge," Diane said firmly. "Consider it an investment in good journalism. I want the exclusive interview, remember? Can't have my star source getting harassed by cable news vultures before I get my story." Elena nodded slowly. "Okay, thank you." The ballroom was emptying now, guests fleeing the scene like rats from a sinking ship. The Thornfield Industries logo on the screens had been replaced by a holding image, but Elena knew the damage was permanent. By tomorrow, those emails and spreadsheets would be on every major news outlet. Marcus Thornfield's empire would collapse like a house of cards. Elena, Sarah Chen, the young woman who'd lost her Columbia scholarship, approached with hesitant steps. "I just wanted to say what you did tonight, standing up to him like that. I should have said something years ago when they took away my scholarship. But I was scared." "I was scared too," Elena admitted. "I'm still scared." "But you did it anyway," Sarah said. "That's the difference between being afraid and being a coward. You chose courage. 3 other people joined them, more victims of Marcus's fraud. A mother whose son's school never received promised supplies. An elderly man whose medical clinic lost crucial funding. A young entrepreneur whose startup never got the grant money Thornfield had personally promised. "We want to help," the mother said. "Testify, give statements, whatever the prosecutors need." "He doesn't get to do this and walk away." Elena felt tears prickling at her eyes. "Thank you. All of you." Preston Carmichael approached the group, his expression grave. "Ms. Martinez, I owe you an apology. I've been on Thornfield's board for 3 years. I should have noticed the irregularities, should have demanded better oversight. I failed in my fiduciary duty, and people suffered because of it." "You're not the one who stole the money," Elena said. "No, but I'm the one who was supposed to prevent it," Preston replied. "That's why I'm pledging $10 million of my own money to restore the foundation's accounts. Every scholarship that was rescinded, every donation that was stolen, I'm going to make it right. It's the least I can do." A few remaining guests overheard and began murmuring among themselves. Another board member stepped forward, pledging $5 million, then another and another. Within minutes, $23 million had been committed to restore what Marcus had stolen. "This is incredible," Diane whispered, her phone out and recording. "This is the redemption arc writing itself." But Elena knew better. Money could rebuild programs and restore scholarships, but it couldn't erase the damage Marcus had done. Sarah Chen would still have crushing student debt. The medical clinic still lost 3 years of potential care. The children who went without computers couldn't get that educational time back. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about acknowledgement, about powerful people admitting their failures and working to repair them. What was happening in this ballroom? Board members taking responsibility, donors pledging restitution, victims finding their voices. This was what accountability actually looked like. "We should go," Rosa said softly, glancing toward the windows. News vans were pulling up outside, reporters spilling onto the sidewalk with cameras and microphones. "Before they trap us here." Diane had already arranged for a car at the service entrance, away from the media circus. As Eleanor and her mother followed the journalist through the kitchen corridors, Elena caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back, no longer invisible, no longer silent, no longer small. They emerged into the cool October night through a delivery door. A black sedan waited, engine running. Elena helped her mother into the back seat, then paused, looking back at the glittering facade of the grand celestial ballroom. Inside that building, she'd been humiliated, threatened, dismissed as nothing. But she'd walked out having changed everything. "Elena," Rosa called from the car. "Mija, we need to go." Elena slid into the sedan, pulling the door closed behind her. Through the tinted windows, she watched the first news crew spot their vehicle and start running toward them. But the driver was already pulling away, merging into Manhattan traffic, carrying them towards safety. "What happens tomorrow?" Rosa asked, her voice small and frightened. Elena took her mother's weathered hand. "Tomorrow we tell the whole story, and then we start building something better." The city light streamed past the windows as they drove through the night, leaving behind the wreckage of Marcus Thornfield's empire and carrying with them the promise of something new. The fight wasn't over, it was only beginning. But for the first time in her life, Elena Martinez wasn't afraid of what came next. She'd found her voice, and she wasn't done using it. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the small law office in Lower Manhattan, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Eleanor sat at a conference table, surrounded by file boxes and legal pads covered in her careful handwriting. Across from her, Catherine Wu reviewed a document with the focused intensity that had made her one of the Southern District's most effective prosecutors. "The grand jury returned the indictment yesterday," Catherine said, looking up with satisfaction. 47 counts: wire fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and breach of fiduciary duty. Marcus Thornfield is looking at 25 to 30 years minimum. Elena absorbed the information quietly. She'd imagined this moment for months, thought she'd feel triumphant when it finally came. Instead, she felt only a weary sort of relief. Marcus Thornfield would face justice, but the real work, rebuilding what he'd destroyed, was far from over. What about Richard Vance and the other executives? Elena asked. Vance took a plea deal, 15 years in exchange for testimony against Thornfield. The board members who participated in the fraud are facing separate charges. Preston Carmichael and the others who genuinely didn't know are cooperating fully. Catherine closed the folder. You did this, Elena. None of it would have been possible without your courage. Courage. Elena had heard that word a lot in the past 6 months. Magazine profiles, news interviews, speaking invitations. Suddenly, everyone wanted to hear from the maid's daughter who'd brought down a billionaire. Some of the attention felt genuine. Much of it felt exploitative. Journalists more interested in the Cinderella narrative than the systemic failures that had allowed Marcus's fraud to continue for years. How are you holding up? Catherine asked, her professional demeanor softening. I know this hasn't been easy. That was an understatement. The weeks following the gala had been brutal. Marcus's lawyers had launched a vicious smear campaign, hiring private investigators to dig through Elena's past, spreading rumors about her mental health and her motives. Conservative media outlets painted her as a vindictive employee with a grudge. Anonymous accounts on social media called her a thief, a liar, worse. But for every attack, there were a dozen voices defending her. Sarah Chen had organized a coalition of Thornfield's victims, and they'd stood together through congressional hearings and media appearances. Diane Westbrook's 4-part exposé in the Manhattan Chronicle had won numerous awards and sparked a national conversation about charity oversight. Preston Carmichael had made good on his pledge, not only restoring stolen funds, but implementing new transparency standards across his entire investment portfolio. I'm okay, Elena said, and mostly meant it. Better than I expected to be. Her phone buzzed with a reminder, meeting at the foundation 2 p.m. Elena gathered her things, thanked Catherine, and headed out into the bright April afternoon. The subway ride to Midtown gave her time to think. The Thornfield Foundation had been dissolved, its remaining assets distributed to the charities it was supposed to serve. But in its place, something new had emerged, the Accountability Project, a non-profit focused on charity oversight and protecting whistleblowers. Preston Carmichael had provided the initial funding, but dozens of other donors had contributed. They'd asked Elena to serve as executive director. She'd almost said no. What did she know about running a foundation? She was 24 years old, with a community college degree and 6 months of intense media training. But Sarah Chen had put it perfectly. Who better to lead an organization about speaking truth to power than someone who actually did it? The foundation's offices occupied the 15th floor of a modest building in Chelsea. A deliberate choice, Elena had insisted. No marble lobbies or crystal chandeliers. Just clean, functional space where serious work could happen. Elena. Marcus greeted her as she stepped off the elevator. She froze, her heart rate spiking before her brain caught up. Not Marcus Thornfield. Marcus Chen, Sarah's younger brother, who'd joined the Accountability Project as operations manager. He was 22, brilliant with logistics, and had the same fierce determination as his sister. Sorry, he said, noticing her reaction. I know the name thing is weird. It's fine, Elena said, forcing a smile. I'll get used to it. The office buzzed with activity. A dozen staff members occupied desks arranged in an open floor plan. No corner offices, no hierarchies. This was intentional too. Elena had seen what happened when organizations became too focused on status and power. We have the senator's office on line 2, called out James Rodriguez, their policy director and a former aide to Margaret Holbrook. They want to discuss the oversight bill. Elena picked up the extension in her small glass-walled office. Senator Holbrook, good afternoon. Elena, I have good news. The senator's warm voice filled the line. We have the votes. The Charitable Accountability and Transparency Act is going to pass. We're looking at a floor vote next week. Eleanor sank into her chair, overwhelmed. The legislation, nicknamed the Thornfield Bill by the media, would require independent audits of all foundations managing more than $5 million, protect whistleblowers from retaliation, and impose criminal penalties for charity fraud. It was everything they'd been fighting for. That's incredible, Elena managed. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Margaret replied. You gave us the ammunition we needed to make this happen. The Thornfield scandal opened doors that had been locked for decades. We're not wasting this opportunity. After the call ended, Eleanor sat in silence, watching her team through the glass walls. James was on another call, probably lining up media coverage for the bill. Marcus Chen reviewed inventory for their upcoming conference on nonprofit governance. Across the room, Rosa Martinez, her mother, sorted through applications for their whistleblower support fund, reading each story with careful attention. That had been the biggest surprise of the past 6 months. Rosa had been terrified initially, convinced they'd both end up homeless and unemployable. But as the story unfolded, as more victims came forward and the scope of Marcus Thornfield's fraud became clear, something had shifted in her mother. The woman who'd spent 15 years making herself invisible had found her own voice. Rosa now ran the Accountability Project support services, helping whistleblowers navigate the psychological and financial challenges of speaking out. She understood their fears intimately, the terror of losing everything, the pressure to stay silent, the weight of taking on powerful people. Her empathy made her uniquely effective. Misha, Rosa called, waving Elena over. You need to see this application. Elena crossed the office and read over her mother's shoulder. A hospital administrator in Cleveland had discovered her CEO was diverting Medicare funds. She had evidence, but was terrified of retaliation. She had 2 kids and a mortgage, couldn't afford to lose her job. We can help her, Eleanor said immediately. Legal support, financial assistance if she needs it, media training if it goes public. The full package. I already started the intake process, Rosa said with a small smile. I knew you'd say yes. A knock on the glass door interrupted them. Diane Westbrook stood there, holding her ever-present notepad.
Got a minute?
I'm working on a follow-up piece about the impact of the Thornfield case. They moved to a small conference room. Diane had become something of a friend over the past months. Though Elena sometimes struggled with the transactional nature of journalism, every conversation was potential material. Every relationship a possible source. I've been tracking the ripple effects, Diane began, flipping through her notes. 73 organizations have implemented new oversight policies directly because of your case. The SEC has opened investigations into 12 other charitable foundations. 3 states have passed their own transparency laws. The cultural shift has been enormous. But, Elena prompted, hearing the unspoken qualifier. But Marcus Thornfield isn't the only one, Diane said quietly. He's not even the worst. I've got leads on at least 5 other major foundations with serious irregularities. The problem is systemic, Elena. Thornfield was just the most dramatic example. Elena had suspected as much. One man's greed hadn't created the conditions that allowed him to steal for years. It was a system built on trust without verification, on the assumption that wealthy philanthropists were inherently noble, on the idea that charity existed above scrutiny. So what do we do? Elena asked. We keep fighting, Diane said simply. You built something here that matters. The Accountability Project isn't just about Thornfield anymore. It's about changing how philanthropy works in this country. The conference room door opened and Preston Carmichael entered, apologizing for being late. At 67, he'd become an unlikely ally and mentor. His guilt over missing Thornfield's fraud had transformed him into a crusader for reform. I just came from a meeting with the Philanthropy Roundtable, Preston said, settling into a chair. Presented your governance framework proposal. They're resistant, no surprise there, but the younger members are interested. We're making progress. How resistant? Elena asked. They think you're too radical. Too young, too angry. Preston smiled wryly. Which tells me you're exactly right. Comfortable people don't want change. That's why we need uncomfortable people to push for it. They spent the next hour strategizing, planning their approach to the upcoming non-profit governance summit. Elena would give the keynote speech, her first major address since a TED Talk that had gone viral 3 months ago. The pressure was immense, but she'd learned to channel anxiety into preparation. As the meeting wrapped up, Preston lingered. "I wanted you to know something," he said. "My granddaughter starts college this fall. She's majoring in public policy because of you. Said she wants to make rich people uncomfortable for a living?" He laughed. "You're inspiring a whole generation, Elena. Don't underestimate that." After everyone left, Elena found herself alone in the office. Through the windows, Manhattan sparkled in the late afternoon sun, the city where dreams were made and destroyed, where power concentrated in the hands of a few, where injustice wore expensive suits and hid behind charitable donations, but also the city where a 23-year-old server in scuffed shoes had said no more. Eleanor's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello?" Heavy breathing on the other end. "Then you destroyed my life. Marcus Thornfield." Elena's blood went cold. "How are you calling me?" "You're awaiting trial." "Lawyer's phone." "Doesn't matter." His voice was ragged, defeated. "I just wanted you to know that I hate you. Everything I built, everything I worked for, gone. Because of you." Elena could have hung up, should have hung up, but she found herself responding, her voice steady. "No, Mr. Thornfield, because of you. You stole from children and cancer patients and people who trusted you. I just made sure everyone found out. You were nothing," he spat. "Nobody. And you took everything from me." "I was never nothing," Elena said quietly. "That was your first mistake, thinking that people without power don't matter. We do. And when you push us far enough, we push back." She ended the call and immediately reported it to Catherine Wu. Marcus would face additional consequences for the contact. But Eleanor found she wasn't shaken by his hatred. If anything, it confirmed she'd made the right choice. The office door opened and Rosa appeared, concern on her face. "Was that him?" "Yes," Elena admitted. "He's angry, desperate. Are you okay?" Elena considered the question honestly. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible, a background character in other people's stories, a daughter trying to stay small enough not to cause problems. Now she ran a foundation, testified before Congress, and had a Wikipedia page. The change was terrifying. But it was also right. "I'm better than okay, Mama," Eleanor said. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They locked up the office together and took the subway home. Not to their old cramped apartment in Queens, but to a modest 2-bedroom in Brooklyn that the Accountability Project's board had insisted on providing. "You can't protect whistleblowers while sleeping on a futon," Preston had said firmly. Over dinner, Rosa's famous arroz con pollo, they talked about the day, about the upcoming summit, about the case in Cleveland. Rosa shared funny stories from the support group she'd started for family members of whistleblowers. Elena described Senator Holbrook's call about the legislation passing. "Your father would be proud," Rosa said suddenly. "If he could see you now." Elena's father had died when she was 7, a construction accident that had left them with nothing. Rosa had gone to work for wealthy families, scrubbing their homes and raising their children while barely seeing her own daughter. It was the grief and injustice that had shaped both their lives, and ultimately led them to this moment. "I hope so," Elena said softly. That night, Elena sat at her laptop, working on her keynote speech for the summit. The words came slowly, each one considered and weighted. She wasn't a natural public speaker, but she'd learned that authenticity mattered more than polish. She wrote about invisibility and voice, about the choice between complicity and courage, about the thousands of people who saw injustice every day but stayed silent because the cost of speaking felt too high, about how systems of power depended on that silence, built themselves on the assumption that ordinary people would always choose safety over truth. "But here's what I learned," she typed. "The cost of silence is higher than the cost of speaking. It's paid in stolen futures and broken promises." It's paid by scholarship students who never get their education, by patients who never get their treatment, by communities that never get their resources. Someone always pays. The question is, will it be the vulnerable or will it be the powerful? She paused, reading back her words. 6 months ago, she'd been terrified of Marcus Thornfield. Now she was building something that would outlast both of them. A structure of accountability that would make it harder for the next Marcus Thornfield to hide his crimes. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. Just saw the news about the indictment. We won. Thank you for not giving up. Elena smiled and typed back, we're not done yet. This is just the beginning, because it was. The Charitable Accountability and Transparency Act would pass, Marcus Thornfield would go to prison, and the Accountability Project would help hundreds of whistleblowers find their voices. But the deeper work, changing a culture that valued wealth over integrity, that protected power over people, that would take years, maybe decades. Elena was ready for it. She saved her speech, shut her laptop and walked to the window. Brooklyn spread out before her, millions of lights in millions of windows, each one representing a life, a story, a person trying to navigate a world that often felt rigged against them. 6 months ago, she'd stood in a glittering ballroom and refused to be invisible. Tonight, she stood in her own apartment, in her own life, building something that mattered. The girl in scuffed shoes had become a woman with a mission. The maid's daughter had become a force for change. And somewhere in a holding cell, Marcus Thornfield was learning what Elena had always known, that power without accountability is just tyranny waiting to be exposed. That wealth without integrity is just paper waiting to burn. That in the end, the truth doesn't care how much money you have or how many friends in high places. The truth just is. And eventually it always comes out. Elena turned from the window and went to bed, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The fight continued. The work remained, but she was no longer afraid. She'd found her voice, and she'd taught others to find theirs. That was the real victory, not in bringing down one corrupt man, but in building a world where the next person who discovered injustice would know they didn't have to face it alone. The story of Marcus Thornfield's downfall would fade from headlines, replaced by new scandals and new outrages. But the movement Elena had started, the insistence that accountability mattered, that truth mattered, that ordinary people had the power to demand both, that would endure. In the darkness of her bedroom, Elena smiled. Tomorrow she would give her speech. Next week the senator's bill would pass. Next month, they'd help another whistleblower find the courage to speak, and somewhere another person in scuffed shoes would decide they'd had enough. They'd stand up to power, armed with nothing but truth and the knowledge that they weren't alone. The revolution wouldn't be televised. It would be lived, one courageous choice at a time, by ordinary people who refused to stay silent. Elena Martinez had started it at a gala in October. But it would belong to everyone who came after, and that was exactly how it should be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.